Welcome to the Dr. R Craft CSS Selectors tutorial. CSS selectors allow you to select and style HTML elements. You can select elements based on their ID, classes, tag names, attributes, and a lot more. This tutorial will go through the most common selectors. So let's start with the most basic selector, the element selector. Element selectors do not have anything before them. You just have to add the tag name of the element that you want to style. In this case, all P elements will be affected. See, all these P elements are affected by the style loop. This element as well as this element. To show that it only affects P elements, let's add an H1 element to show that the element selector only selects a specific element. Now, as you can see, this H1 element is not affected by the style. However, we can actually change this to select all H1 elements instead of P elements. Now, as you can see, H1 element is affected by the rule, but these elements are not. Now let's move on to ID selectors. ID selectors are used to select an element with a specific ID. Now, two elements cannot have the same ID. So IDs are only for one unique element. And so this paragraph has ID of para1 and it's selected over here. Before ID selectors, you have to put a hash symbol, otherwise it won't register as an ID. So let's add a new ID here, para2, and then change the style rule to apply to that. So now this is affected by the style. Now ID selectors can be accompanied with another selector. So this only selects the P element with ID of para2. Let's change it. So if we do a div element with ID para2, since the element with ID para2 is a P element, then no other element on the page will be affected by the style. Now let's move on to another common selector, the class selector. Class selectors come after a period, otherwise they would be registering as a class. And so both this heading and this paragraph are affected by the style, because they both have a class that matches the style. Now, if we remove this heading is no longer affected by the style. Add it back, and you can have multiple classes for a single element, unlike an ID. And you can create multiple classes for multiple styles. Let's add another class selector here with color set to red. Now let's add a second class here. And now, as you can see, the heading is just center aligned, but the paragraph is both center aligned and has a red color. You can add multiple classes to an element by separating it with a space. Now, like IDs, class selectors can be accompanied by any other selector. So now it only selects P elements with class of my class. Now let's move on to grouping selectors. In style sheets, there are often elements that have the same style. To make the code more compact, you can actually group the selectors like so. You have to group selectors with a comma. As you can see, when I run the code, it gives us the exact same result as before. Now you can group any type of selector with any type of selector. So let's give it ID. Now I can use that. See, it works as intended. The largest heading is affected by the style, and this paragraph is also affected by the style. This concludes the CSS selectors tutorial. Thank you very much for watching.